Travis founded Nordic APIs back in 2013, and it's been really inspirational for us all going forward. And like he said, my name is Bill Doerrfeld. I've been the editor-in-chief for the Nordic APIs blog for almost 4 years now. I'm terrible about having business cards, so again, if you want to get in touch with me, it's all right there, bill@nordicapis.com, and Doerrfeld Bill is my Twitter handle. So back when I started working with Nordic APIs, Travis was like, shepherd the community in some way. I think that's the verbiage he used. So we've been forming this community, building it up. We have API owners, people that are practicing, the art of APIs. We have people interested in consuming them, whether internally or using some third-party service. We have a lot of thought leaders supporting the blog and obviously speaking at events like these. And some tooling specialists as well, like interested in security, API management, analytics, and everything that really goes into building a great API product. Because that's kind of what we're seeing in the industry right now, people adopting an API as a product mentality. And to that end, the mission statement for Nordic APIs has always been to help companies make smarter tech decisions using APIs. And now, in 2018, it's really, how do we make the world programmable? And so like what Travis was discussing, we broke things down into these 6 different insights: API platforms, strategy, design, business, security, and marketing. So this is kind of how we structure our content, and you'll see on the event liners these sort of notes throughout the conference as well. And like Travis said, the blog is very community-driven. We really strive for vendor-neutral content so that we can all come together on best practices that everyone can relate to. And like he said, submissions are always welcome. So like we said, contact me if you'd ever like to share your thoughts. I've been very excited to work with a lot of people on the blog. We're up to over 50 different contributors throughout the years. Some of the more notable writers are Christopher Sandoval, security expert, Chris Wood, open banking specialist, Art Anthony, our resident copywriter, and some other people that have been really cool. So if you'd like to join this star-studded community, hit me up, and we can make that happen. As Travis mentioned, I'm also putting together these online events so that we can meet throughout the year in between these major conferences. And our 5th one is coming up on November 14th, so you can tune into that. It's just free to watch on YouTube. And what we do is we bring in some core community members to give some lightning talks. And the next one is going to be kind of focused on more the business angle of providing APIs, kind of thinking about how we monetize them and the different methods that are used for that. It's kind of a topic that we haven't really discussed that much, so I'm interested in digging into that. Like Travis said, we have a lot of new ebooks out, from marketing, strategy, business, to different platform ideas. There's a lot of free knowledge, and I think it was one of the other mission statements he told me from the get-go, let's not have any email wall, a barrier. Let's just give this out for free. So there's just free PDFs out there for you to entertain yourselves with. But kind of taking a larger perspective, I want to go back to where Nordic API started in 2013. And at that point, there were around 10,000 APIs cataloged in the programmable web directory, which, if you're not familiar, is a directory of public APIs that is hand-curated and based in Seattle. And at that time, people were considering their mobile-first strategy, and we saw many sectors in the midst of transforming, as they had been for some time. So where we've come from that, well, the API space has doubled in size according to that same programmable web directory. We're at 20,000 different public APIs. Of course, that's not even considering all the different private models out there and all the different partner integrations that are kind of not publicized that well. So that number could be extraordinarily higher. We're also seeing a lot of new entrants make their way into the API space, including banking. That's really been forced by PSD2 and some other global initiatives. We're also seeing more brick-and-mortar businesses like Walmart or Levi, to mention some American companies, but also more international government, retail, e-commerce, artificial intelligence and cognitive services, and more. So there's a lot of momentum, and I think we'll continue to see different types of sectors dabble with APIs in some way. So knowing all that, knowing where we've come and where we kind of are, so what's the future? Where's the industry heading? And so for this presentation, I wanted to give sort of a pre-conference overview. In the past, I've kind of focused on different niche subjects, but I'd like to go through all the different topics that we'll be discussing over the course of these 2 days and pick out some recurring themes so that if you were just to walk away from the event with just a single bit of knowledge, hopefully this would cover most of it and have some takeaways for you. So I went through and I looked at all the different speaker topics that were submitted, and I helped curate the event, so I was able to see them as they come in. And we're going to see a lot of REST versus GraphQL comparisons. More event-driven architectures are very interesting right now. People are discussing how we're generating SDKs, whether programmatically or through hand-curated means. And from there, global standards like GDPR and PSD2. People are considering different legacy redesigns from old SOA to REST. So there's a lot going on, and I'm really excited to dig into all this. But I wanted to try and collate it all, condense it all into some takeaways for you all, because 65 sessions is physically impossible to attend at a 2-day event. So like what Travis and I were discussing earlier, I've kind of made organized this by our insights. So step 1 would be API design. And we're seeing a lot of emphasis on a design-first methodology when it comes to APIs. People are considering different toolings and different strategies they can use for collaborative development. And we're also going to see some instances where REST might be falling short in the midst of new event-driven architectures that privilege events over states. We're also seeing a lot of widespread adoption and support for the Open API specification for things like generating documentation and other developer resources. So that's kind of the state of API design currently. Something that Z is going to mention in his talk is that GraphQL brings a revolutionary API consumer-oriented approach. So I'm interested and excited about hearing more about GraphQL from him. And on the blog, we've kind of covered the different style methodologies as well, finding that REST is good for using standardized HTTP verbs, kind of in hypermedia-dependent scenarios, whereas GraphQL is offering some greater data control and kind of specific user-driven data return scenarios. Webhooks are great for automating data updates and having that sort of polling in your clients. And then gRPC we found to be great for lightweight IoT scenarios and lower power scenarios. So this is just a very high-level overview of kind of design style and what's being discussed right here in this conference and in our industry. Check out that article if you'd like to read up more on that. So the second insight is marketing. And right now, we're having a lot of great discussion on developer experience. So thinking about APIs as a product, how can we fine-tune that developer experience to thus onboard more developers? So that's becoming very critical. It also means that people are experimenting with different hands-on approaches to entertain developers and help onboard them onto new public APIs or partner, even internal APIs. So companies are discussing gamification, different sandbox, and testing environments. And this isn't even limited to the public or partner models. I think a lot of this best practice advice applies to even internal services. And I think we're going to hear some talks on inner sourcing, which is a concept that's kind of imitating the public models within a company. Next, we have a lot of emphasis on developer relations. Obviously, having great evangelists and advocates for developer program was important in 2013, and it's even more important now as the teams around an API product continue to grow. And lastly, we're seeing the importance of tooling and SDKs, code samples, code tutorials, and more to make that marketing channel, that front end for developers, as easy as possible. And like what Adil said in his speaker submission and what he'll talk about, are that APIs with massive developer traction ensure to provide SDKs and code samples in every language their developers speak. Maybe he's a little biased because that's what his tool does. But in general, that's a great thought because we want to meet developers where they are and understand their needs and thus react to that. Another place, another way to find developers is thinking about the discovery process. So how are developers actually finding APIs that they want to integrate with? And I think at every event so far, I've done this sort of roundup of different marketplaces and directories and lists that are trying to make sense of the space. So Programmable Web is one, and I actually did work with them some years back, helping curate their directory. But there's many others right now. Rapid API is one, and they are creating a more user-friendly marketplace where developers can go to learn about APIs and compare different APIs. So there's many out there. Some are more corporate than others. Some are more hand-curated, like APIs.guru, more of a homebrewed project. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting projects and marketplaces out there that are collating APIs. So what that means for API providers, especially people that are required to have public-facing models, is that using these sort of channels can help promote your service and get it in the hands of more users. So just one thing to think about with marketing and what's going on with marketing in 2018. So next comes API business. So what are companies doing right now in the greater scope of things outside of the technical stack? What are they doing with their business models when it comes to APIs? Well, we've kind of noticed a trend from small dev shops to more enterprise involvement in the API industry. We've also seen API partner programs become more cost-effective, especially looking at social programs like Instagram or Facebook, continually shuttering their API programs in favor of partner integrations that are more valuable. It's because the API has really been valued as a product due to the high value of their data and functionalities. And so this is making business considering different monetization methods, as we'll see throughout the conference. And something that Edward Marushan of SmartBear, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, Marushan of SmartBear mentions is that APIs are just now hitting the maturity level of many other systems in everyday enterprises, now fully represented by marketing, sales, finance, and operations. So I think this just kind of sums up where we're at pretty well right now. Out of the engineered dungeons comes a fully fledged API product that's supported by a marketing team, sales team, finance, and operations. So we've come a long ways, and just proof to the growth of our industry. Another proof to the growth is just looking at the acquisitions of API management platforms over the years. I mean, starting in 2013 with Microsoft's acquisition, down to Red Hat with Freescale, and a more recent one with Salesforce and MuleSoft. We've just seen a lot of enterprise interest, and that just means that what we're doing is valuable, and it's actually a pretty exciting time to be working with APIs. Next comes API platforms. So what is the underlying architecture? What does the platform actually look like? Well, like I said previously, there's still a lot of legacy systems that are making a jump to a more REST, more HTTP web API-driven makeup. People are considering service meshes, and of course, there's been a lot of talk around microservices development. In doing so, though, there's been a new need for different types of API governance, which we'll see throughout the conference. Many people are considering adopting a schema-first methodology for development to also avoid miscommunication in collaborative teams. And we're still seeing API management as a very viable opportunity, as many APIs are using these different management platforms, whether they be open source iterations, third-party solutions, and or other more home-brewed greenfield initiatives. So that's kind of the state with API platforms. We're also seeing some new operational theories emerge. This is just one, API ops. I'm interested to see what these fellows are doing with this community. Next is API security. I know one talk is going to be mentioning the different strides from voice-driven and mobile technologies and how that's affecting security. And I think that's a cool question because we are entering a very voice-driven, voice assistant moment in our society. We also need to consider all the different hacking methods that are out there when it comes to web accessible data, like data scraping, service misuse, unauthorized aggregation, and fake account creation. The list goes on. And also, in the midst of GDPR, we're having a lot more focus on data privacy, making companies want to hunker down their public API access, especially, and have more gateways and firewalls in front of their services. Where OAuth and OpenID is coming in is to help bridge that gap with better authorization and authentication methods. So we're going to hear a lot more about that throughout the event. Also with some more general dev security ops philosophies as well. So this is kind of where API security stands with our event and in 2018 in general. And something that Andrew Slivker mentions, he's from Nevatech, is that there's no API security without API monitoring and auditing, and I think that's really important. Also involving some sort of management layer in a way, just having as much visualizations and data about how your API is being used is very important. So security does need analytics in a way. The last insight is API strategy. And we're going to hear a lot of discussion at this event around contract-driven testing and consumer-driven testing as well. A lot of that has to do with keeping track of dependencies with the different microservice developments. People are always also considering different ways to mock servers with virtual environments for different parallel development strategies. We're also seeing more emphasis on WebSockets, webhooks, event-driven architecture, which is bringing more nuanced testing concerns because we have to think about different client and server relationships. So I'm interested in seeing more discussion on that. We're hearing a lot of interest in serverless computing, whether it be multi-region, multi-cloud, or a combination of all that. And then I know there's one talk that's going to be discussing the concept of an API gateway and if that is something that should be built internally or outsourced to a different solution or company. So a lot of interesting advice on the strategy side of things. And some less interesting advice, too. Martin's saying boring really is best when it comes to your API strategy. So I'm interested in understanding what he means by that. Also, when we're doing this kind of State of the Union review, I like to consider different industries that are being affected by APIs over the course of the last year. And I think our submissions for speakers and the case studies, especially, that speakers will be sharing in these 2 days are a good indicator of the different companies that APIs are impacting right now. And as a side note, if you haven't yet, check out the subway underground system in Stockholm. It's really cool. A lot of interesting public art, very interesting underground subways right there. So kind of going back to that question, obviously we saw a lot of interest in banking and open banking with PSD2, CMA, and other initiatives throughout the global financial landscape is really kind of pushing the tide toward API adoption in these industries. But we're also seeing some new incumbents like energy and utilities. Their old kind of systems are ripe for API disruption. That and then other case studies that we're going to be talking about through the event, sectors such as Internet of Things, medical, news and media, IoT stuff like smart homes, manufacturing, even railways, telecommunications. Great indicators that APIs are affecting a very wide consortium of different businesses. And that's kind of the theme of this conference, is talking about APIs on a more global scale, on a more global landscape. So going back to my initial question of where are we heading as an industry right now? Well, I believe that the API is a business-to-business lingua franca, if you will. It's really our modern communication device. And in order for that sort of API ubiquity to be common, we really need those best practices to be shared. We really need discussion of different standards and discussion of different styles that are matching these business scenarios. Because right now, it's not as tech-forward as it once was. We're looking at our tools and our resources that we have from a business standpoint, and then kind of filling in the gaps from there. So kind of we're able to take a step back and view what we want to initiate. That all leads to a lot of discussion, and I'm glad to be helping this community move forward through that. I also believe that there's a lot of different sectors that APIs have yet to revive, and we're going to continue to see these different brick and mortar institutions be revived through different digital platformification over the next few years. I think naturally the API tooling space is a great space to be a part of right now, because they're going to be meeting the needs of these new entrants. So inherently, it's going to be growing to respond to meet those needs. We're continually refining our approach to API strategy, our approach to developer experience, and improving the overall platform strategy. And like I said earlier, API security has really become a business-critical asset, and a lot of APIs will continue to hunker down their access and put better controls over access and identity management when it comes to APIs. I think that's already happening in our space. Standards are continuing to evolve. Like I said earlier, we're going to have some interesting comparisons about all this new sort of tech in our industry. And what that all is leading to, I believe, is a interconnected universe, the API universe, where predictive tech is improving the quality of life for us. So that's my presentation, sort of a state of the union and an introduction to what you're going to be experiencing and exposed to here at the conference. Like I said earlier, here's my information, bill@nordicapis.com, if you'd ever like to get in touch. Please come say hi. I'd love to hear your story and just be inspired for different articles or whatever, and I just hope you enjoy the event in general. Like I said, feel free to share your API story. We're always open to submissions for the blog. It's a good way to share your knowledge with others. And we're also organizing additional events, the next one being the Austin API Summit. So good reason to get over to Texas if you're crazy enough to do that. My slides should be going up soon, shortly, at that Twitter handle. And yeah, that's all I got for you right now. I think I'm a little short, but I think we have Eric up now. Yeah.
Do you want to?